Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here on day 2 of the Sustainable Value Creation from Infrastructure Asset Leadership ALN Winter Summit. We are excited for today's international panel, and transportation later today. But before we get the events underway, we just want to say that we are so grateful for the participation of all our esteemed panelists from all over the world. And we are very grateful for the continued support of our patron members, as well as our other organizational members that help make events like this and others possible. On that note, we have an event tomorrow, Thursday, our standard ALN Thursday at 3. And we will be talking to a panelist that was scheduled for yesterday, but couldn't make it. So we're going to catch up with Michael Demers from Grant Thornton tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern. But today's summit is featuring learning from international infrastructure asset leadership success. And I will introduce now Mike Ordinaro, Executive Director of the Asset Leadership Network, to talk about this event a little more.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you to everyone who is attending today, and thanks to everyone who was there yesterday. We had a great start to this event, and we have the international panel today because we wanted to show the U.S. what is possible in terms of improving asset management based on what's happening around the world. But we were really happy yesterday to see that the state of Michigan is doing an excellent job right here in the United States. And we're already working to further promote the excellent efforts that they are doing. We are producing a video of that presentation, and the GAO, Government Accountability Office presentation, National Academy of Science presentation from yesterday, and we'll have highlights. But just spectacular to know that there is world-class asset management going on at the state level in the United States. But today we have the honor of hosting people from around the world. We have Akshay Prabhu, founder and president of Aesthetic. His company is an ALN organizational member, and they have offices in Australia, Canada, and in London, United Kingdom. We have Jorge Cerezo Restrepo, the asset manager, director of asset management at EPM Columbia. Adesio Scalese Jr. is the regional maintenance principal engineer at LATAM, and Chris Chen, executive director at Asset Management Ontario, the entire province of Ontario. So that's equivalent to the state of Michigan. Thank you for joining us, Chris. Michelle Walker, who gave us an excellent preview last week of the spectacular work that's going on in the city of Greater Geelong. And you might want to reference back to her more detailed presentation last week after you see her today. And she's joining us for this. We really appreciate the extra effort she's giving to us. Ben Clark, he is the group manager at assets and infrastructure at the town of Walkerville, but he's also been the asset manager of other municipalities throughout Australia. He's heavily involved in the associations, asset management associations in Australia, and is working on national issues in Australia. And after the presentations by these asset owners, Sergio Custodio from ABS Quality Evaluations in Brazil will be joining for discussion, as will some of our other ALN member organizations. We've got a packed 90 minutes to learn about what our colleagues from around the world are doing. We're so happy and excited to hear from them. So I'm just going to turn over to Akshay Prabhu and let him kind of set the stage and facilitate these excellent presentations that are coming. Ashay?
Thank you, Mike, and I hope you can hear me okay.
Nick, you can stop share. Yes, we can hear you, and we don't need the share. Thank you.
I might just share my screen just for a minute, just to set the scene here. Let me know when you can see my screen, Nick.
We can see it.
Yeah, perfect. So it's a real great pleasure to be facilitating such a rich and diverse panel like this. I've heard from Mike this morning what a wonderful day everyone has had yesterday in relation to the summit. And the importance of having an international cast at solving some of the world's biggest issues at the moment, the problem of dealing with the infrastructure deficit, the backlogs that our assets are facing, and in particular, when we are at this point in time, staring at one of the biggest IIJA type stimulus money that is being provided to governments across the United States. But let's just take a moment, a step back, and have a think about what this means in terms of the current state of our infrastructure. And really what we're looking at is an overall grade of C-. And the various statements which will follow this will focus on the issues, the methods of solving these sorts of infrastructure deficits, and what is required from a process, technology, and information perspective to be able to answer the hard questions. But really, for me, the facilitation of this is about bringing experts together, about looking at the C- grade and saying, how do we now lift the game? How do we shift the focus from reactive to proactive and take this infrastructure base back to a B grade, at least on an average? And more importantly, attempt to reduce this infrastructure creep of about $500 billion every 10 years that has been predicted by ASCII. This is being done in America as we speak in terms of solving the problem. It has been done in Australia, as you will find out from some of the speakers, and we'll get some wisdom from Brazil and Colombia in terms of where they are with their asset management process. But I just wanted to share that just to set the scene in terms of today's speakers, and really get to the essence of these statements that we're going to hear from 5 of these leading international panelists. So I'd like to welcome now Jorge Torizo to the panel and commence the session in terms of the opening statements. Thank you, Jorge.
Okay, thank you, Ashay. Let me show you something first. Okay, I am Jorgeceres. I am a director of asset management in EPN. EPN is a Colombian company, and we got a EPN group. We are a multi-leading business group in 6 countries, 7 business lines. We got power generation, power transmission and distribution, natural gas, water, water treatment, and solid waste management. We are in South America and in Central America with 44 companies, more than 15,000 employees, more than 9,000 providers and contractors, and near 25 million beneficiary people in Latin America. Okay, we are in the implementation of 55,001 in Colombia, only in Colombia, not in all the group. And we had a maturity level assessment, 1.7 in 2015. Now we are getting level 3. We did a business case, 10 years, and we get more than $8 million average, 21% more than expected. Okay, the real or the most important or the main important things are the conscious leadership because the people read that the boss does. If the boss is asking about improvement, is asking about the target and the alignment of the target with the organization, and is the people does too. The people follow the leader, and this is very important. We create a team supported by the first level of the company, and if the first level of the company is not supporting, it's very, very difficult to change the organization and to get the target. In implementation, we have in Colombia in 5 companies, according to the culture, because the culture is different in the departments. It's not the same, it's the same country, but it's not the same culture and form to work. And it's really very important on a communication strategy, very different in one of the company, in each company. Very important, strengthen knowledge of the team and the managers. We began for these topics, strengthen knowledge and share good practice, not invent the wheel again. We got some awards, one from the science ministers for the project for the asset management implementation in 2017, 2019, 2020, and 2021 to consider the ministry organizational innovation. We have a model EAM equal for all the subsidiaries, all companies the same, and we have one company certified in the standards, and May another, and in the rest of the year we will have 3 more companies for this group. Okay, I think that is all. Excuse me. About me, I am electrical engineer, specialist in transmission and distribution of electrical energy, specialist in industrial organization and economic regulation, 33 years in EPM. I began in maintenance, transmission lines, chief of electrical transaction, that is a commercial and regulatory area, and since 8 years ago, director of asset management. Thank you, Ashay. All of me.
Thank you, Jorge. It was really informative, and we look forward to discussing interactively a little bit later on your trials and experiences in the implementation of that ISO 55000. I'd now like to request for the next statement speaker, and just for everyone's information, we're doing around about 5 minutes of statements from the international panel that will then be followed by a more interactive discussion on the points raised. So I'd like to welcome on that note Edizio Scalisi, the Regional Maintenance Principal Engineer at Latham. Edizio, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashay. I will share my my screen. Just a minute, please.
Yeah, please.
Sorry, guys, this part of my presentation is in Portuguese because it's not possible to translate for English because it's a corporative presentation. So I need to follow this standard because I'm based in Brazil and I need to use in Portuguese version, okay?
Yes,
I'm
that's
so-
okay for it to be in Portuguese, but can you make it full screen?
Yes, sure. Sure. Just a minute. You can see my screen?
Yes, but it's in, it's not in presentation mode, but that's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Well, Syngenta is well, sorry guys, my name is Edésio Scalesi. I'm based in Brazil. I'm located in Paulínia site. It's a crop protection site. I'm a mechanical engineer. I've been working in Syngenta since 1999, and I have opportunity to work in so many areas in Syngenta. And it's a pleasure for me to stay here. Thanks, Eduardo and Sergio, to invite me to be part of this excellence summit, and I'm very happy. Okay, so Syngenta is an agrochemical company. I'll try to cover in 5 minutes, okay, in order to save time for the next. Syngenta is an agrochemical company, is a multinational company, is part of Syngenta Group, Syngenta China Group, okay, and we have 4 business units in Syngenta. Is a Syngenta Crop Protection, Syngenta Seeds, Adama, and Syngenta Crop China. Okay. Syngenta has 48,000 people around the world. We are operations in more than 100 countries, and the sales is $23 billion a year. Okay. We are the first one in crop protection, the third one in seeds, and the first one in fertilizers, okay? We have a big portfolio about our products like soya, cereals, specialties like coffee, potato, and the others, vegetables, sugarcane, rice, and corn, okay? This is our special, our product is so dedicated for this kind of culture crops, okay? So Syngenta has
If I can just ask you to also flick the slides as you go through, if that's what you're doing. Sorry.
Yeah. This slide?
They're not moving here.
Ah, okay. Okay, this is a move for another slide, Asha. It's not moving for you? You can see the first one or not?
You can see the first one. So
Now they've moved.
Oh, yes, now?
yes,
move.
no.
Yes. Okay, Syngenta. Are you
That's good.
try again? Okay, Syngenta has a 4 business unit around the world. Is a Syngenta Crop Protection, Syngenta Seeds, and Adama, and it's part of Syngenta Group China. Okay, we have 48,000 people in Syngenta. We are located in more than 100 countries, and the sales more than $23 billion a year. In crop protection, Syngenta is the #1. In seeds, the #3, and the fertilizers, the #1. Okay. And the next one, we have a big portfolio to support and to support the farmers, like corn, soy, cereals, rice, sugarcane, vegetables, specialties like potato, coffee, any other things. Okay. Our products is to this kind of crops. And Syngenta has a commitment until 2025 to have a good growth plan in order to have the best sustainability for the crop protection around the world and the best seeds around the world. Okay, if you click on this QR code, we can see in detail the good growth plan. Okay, it's open just to read this QR code, and you can see our commitment about the future in Syngenta. Okay, just to explain about faster about the implementation about ISO 55000 in Brazil. We decided to implement the first time in seed sites, and next year or by the end of this year we are studying to implement in crop sites here in Brazil. Okay, we started to have the first idea in April 2009, and after that we had a training about ISO 55000 in order to understand and how the benefits ISO can bring for us. And we did a benchmarking. AES here in Brazil is one of the best company that implemented the ISO 55000 in Brazil. And after that, we did a gap analysis in order to understand where we are and how difficult to implement ISO 55000 in seed sites. And after that, we have a good alignment with the quality team. And the quality manager asked to me, "Oh, Edes, you are leading to implement ISO 55000, but I'd like to implement ISO 9000 at the same time. You can help me?" "Yes, I can." So we decided to implement 9000 at the same time, and we did a gap analysis too. It's the same process that we had in ISO 55000. And January 2020, we had a senior team alignments in order to check the benefits and the next steps for the project. In February 2020, we received project approval. And April, we started to do a welcome meeting with the team. We started the project in June 20. And in this year, in January this year, we certified by ABS our ISO and the ISO 55000 and 9000 certification. Okay, for sites in Brazil, for seed sites at this moment. Okay, and that's all. I'm open for the question. Okay, if you have.
Thank you, Edesio. We'll probably take questions towards the end of the the 5 speakers here. But thank you very much for that. I'll be really interested in the interactive discussion to talk about how you went through the organizational change, how leadership embraced the ISO Foundation. Great. That'd be a great topic to look at. I'd like to now welcome for the next statement Mr. Chris Chen, from the Executive Director of Asset Management Ontario. Chris has got a significantly fantastic background in bringing asset management to Canada, in particular around regulation and ensuring that there is capacity built within local government and municipalities in Canada. Rich experience, Chris. Looking forward to your 5-minute statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Shay, and thank you very much to Asset Leadership Network and the other speakers, as well as to the audience. I think it's particularly important with the context of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that ALN is facilitating some of these conversations. And we've certainly learned a lot from ALN and the work that's being done in US and other jurisdictions. My context is the province of Ontario, Canada. And I think if we step back and we think about infrastructure investment, there's basically 3 challenges that infrastructure investment tries to address. The first is, how do you maximize your return on infrastructure investment? The second is, how do you demonstrate accountability? And the third is, how do you recognize that a lot of local communities, who are the people who are receiving the funds, have the best knowledge about the local services, the local infrastructure related services that their residents need? And Ontario offers an interesting case study because over the past decade, it has adopted 3 models with varying degrees of success. The first model it tried to adopt was kind of a voluntary or recommended guidance model. They did that from 2012 to 2014. And They published some best practice guidelines, and the province, which is like a state in the US, recommended municipalities to follow these guidelines. And the result was it was a mixed set of outcomes. In 2014, the federal government, which gives out money through gasoline tax used to fund municipal infrastructure, required municipalities that receive these funds to develop and implement asset management plans and to report how these plans were used to guide infrastructure planning and investment. The only thing, though, about this requirement was that they did not specify what should be in the asset management plans or what, and so the range of asset management plans that they've gotten back has been very broad. The third model, or the third stage over the past 10 years has been about a provincial regulation which stipulates in much more rigorous terms what should be in an asset management plan. And so it's a staged approach where they require a policy and then different kinds of requirements over a set of years, looking at things like specifying your levels of service, your risk, your life cycle management, and your financial strategy to accommodate that over a forecast period of 10 years. So that's a little bit about the Ontario model and the three different approaches that have been tried over the past decade to address how do you maximize value for infrastructure investment, how do you demonstrate accountability, and how do you sort of recognize that local communities have the best knowledge, on the ground knowledge about their local services. And asset management plans are the critical glue in all of that. Thank you, Ashay.
Thank you, Chris, and really fantastic mechanism there to embed asset management as a way of life. I have seen and heard firsthand the great work being done in Ontario. And more importantly, what would be really good to discuss later on is how the municipalities took this up. What was that broad range of content within the asset management plans, your views on prescriptive versus non-prescriptive regulation, and perhaps even looking at where the auditing standards might be in the future, Chris. I think it would be really useful for the panel to start to look at the link between regulated asset management versus thought leadership-based good practice asset management, and how to bring them together. And on that note, I'd like to bring Ben Walker for his 5-minute statement from the city of Walkerville in Australia. And just as an introduction, and I come from Australia myself. People ask me why and how strategic asset management evolved down under here. And the reality was back in the late 90s, we realized that we only had back then 19 million people with about 2.5 million taxpayers and such a vast infrastructure. And the concept of doing more and more with less and less wasn't just nice to have for us, it was a must have. And that's how this has evolved. And I'd let Ben make a statement on his journey in this asset management game. Thanks, Ben.
Just share my screen.
Yep, it was shared before.
I don't know what happened. All right, there we go. All right, thanks very much, Ashay. As they've mentioned, my name is Ben Clark from the town of Walkerville. I'm the group manager for assets and infrastructure there. Just a quick introduction of the town of Walkerville. Basically, we're about 5 kilometres northeast of the central business district of Adelaide, South Australia. We have an extremely high level of service within our council area. And our asset base that we're responsible for includes roads, footpaths, stormwater, any open space structures and infrastructure, lighting, buildings, and we have a number of historic and heritage items that we have to manage. But what I really want to discuss is Australia's identification over their journey on the need to ensure that as we're looking at ISO 55000 legislative and requirements and things like that, that we're ensuring that the capability and capacity is being increased at the rate that we need to. So over the last 20 years or more, asset management has been happening in Australia. Australia identified the need to shrink that gap. So you can see the black line here is the legislation and best practice, which is really driving where we want to be, that real thought leadership in the future. And then if we do nothing, the green line is current. So if we just continue on without really doing any additional training or anything like that, but what you can see is that leaves a significant capability gap in between. So Australia spent a lot of time looking at how we can shrink that gap. And what we identified is the need for a stepped approach. So you can't just go from the bottom straight to the top. You need to work through different aspects within asset management to increase the capability of staff, the elected bodies, managers. The whole organisation needs to be increasing their capability within the sector. So, you might start with condition assessments, do some capability increase in that, and then move on to the next one rather than try and do it all at once. You need to start and then just build. So I guess what's the most important things that Australia's identified and that I've seen in my career that is of benefit to really build capacity in initially is undertaking condition assessments on assets, understanding the useful life of assets and how that will impact on your capital renewal planning, understanding the fair value and the way we actually value our assets, and then how that impacts the long-term financial plan, data management and how we look after our data, how we make sure it's up to date, do we have the right information, our levels of service, whether they be our technical levels of service, or if we're mature enough where we go to the community and ask them what they're willing to pay for. And as I mentioned, capital renewal planning. What we've done in Australia is we've developed through some of our local asset management organisations is what we call practice notes that dive into and give you a how-to on how to undertake those. So the one on the right here, the condition assessment and asset performance for footpaths and cycleways, anyone can pick that document up, read through, get a better understanding on how to undertake an assessment, what that looks like, how that can be used, and they work through that. What that enabled us to have is a standardized approach to asset management for, it didn't matter whether you're a small regional council, a large metropolitan, a capital city, everyone was built on this as the basis. And then from there, organizations, as they've matured, they'd then be able to take this as the starting point and then build and manipulate it to suit their own organizational needs. What we're finding now in Australia is what is the future capability of asset managers? Where do we need to continue to grow into the future? And that's really about asset managers as communicators. We play such an important role in delivering the infrastructure to our communities and understanding what they need, but also being able to communicate to them what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what that may mean for them moving forward. So in closing, what I really want to just get across is the need that asset managers need to become storytellers. We need to be able to tell the story of our assets to the communities, to our executives, to our elected bodies, to government officials, when we're going for grant funding or stimulus funding, tell that story of why the money is needed, where it's going to be spent and how, and then we can ensure that we actually have a seat at the table to really tell the story and get our needs across. So I'll hand back to you, Ashay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, for that really insightful presentation on the capacity build, which I'll vouch for in terms of bringing consistency into the asset management game, whether it's based on ISO certification or not. It's a way of life in terms of embedding philosophies. And really pleasing to see these type of practice notes being now embedded within Canada and the US as well, in terms of not reinventing the wheels, but learning from the ropes that have been built in other places around the world. And we'll come back to that, Ben, in the interactive discussion. But it gives me now really great pleasure to welcome Michelle Walker from the city of Greater Geelong to present her statement of a city that, in my humble opinion, is one of the leading ones in the world in terms of having processed asset management really as a way of life, from the back room to the boardroom, from the council chambers to the people in the field, and more importantly to the community. So welcome, Michelle. Looking forward to your statement.
Thanks, Ashley. And give me a wrap up because I could talk about this for hours. So I'll try and stay within my my allotted time. But yeah, it's wonderful to be here for us. It's early in the morning, but it was a pleasure, well, kind of a pleasure to get out of bed and be here to join your 2022 Winter Summit on sustainable value creation through asset management. So yes, I am from the city of Greater Geelong, which is located in the sort of southeast of Australia. We are the largest regional city in the state. We cover an area of 1,252 square kilometres. We have quite a length of coast line. So we have a broad range of assets that we're managing and a population of 264,000. So we've got quite a big population, which is growing rapidly, which presents a number of challenges in terms of all the assets we're taking on. We have a capital budget of around 200 million a year, and we have 2,700 staff in our organisation that are all here to deliver the works that we do. So just to mention, as Ben was touching on earlier, we've gone through quite a lot of change in Australia with regard to asset management. Asset management's always been a big part of the way we operate in Australia. We have a vast country. We perhaps don't have the deep pockets that some of you in the States have had historically. So we've had to be very smart about the way we look after our infrastructure, our huge lengths of road, as you can imagine, that go across fairly sparsely populated regions. So we've had to be pretty clever, doing a lot more with a lot less. But in recent years, we've had some big challenges around sustainability, particularly around the regional councils in Australia. So we've had some big changes in terms of in the industry. The fair value accounting standards, which have come into place over the years, which mean we have to have a really, really rigorous asset register now. Not just that we list our assets, but those assets have to be componentized into parts. Like, for example, a building is not just a building, it's a roof, it's a floor, it's walls, and all the different parts that deteriorate differently. We've had to really put a lot of work into that. And also our local government act in Victoria has changed, and it has mandated the way we do certain parts of our asset management. That has to be linked to service planning, and we have to have in place now a long-term financial plan, which is at least covering a span of 10 years. So these things have really changed the way we do asset management, and we have to have an asset plan in place. So within Geelong, our asset management plan, as Ben was also mentioning, it's all about storytelling. It's how you tell the story. Well, our story on a page, our asset management plan looks like this. There's a lot going on this slide, but it just gives you a bit of an overview of what we're trying to do with our assets. And this is something that we want to bring to our executive to really give them a snapshot of what asset management is. So our asset stories, we have $3.1 billion worth of assets. These include civil assets, social infrastructure assets, our buildings and our open space and rec, environmental assets and corporate assets. And these exist to deliver a service to our community. Now, where we want to go in our organisation, I think, Mike, you were mentioning the City of Michigan had really aligned their asset practice with their corporate vision. Where our corporate vision in Geelong is to be a clever and creative organisation, a thought leader in technology. We want to have a prosperous economy, and we want to link our asset practice to delivering this outcome. We anticipate on the road ahead that we're going to have continued massive growth. We've got demographic changes, we've got climate change, which is going to impact our infrastructure, a community which has growing service needs and aspirations, a vast range of technology we can take advantage of, and increasingly limited resources. So how are we going to get from here to here? We have a strategy in place, and our strategy focuses on 3 streams: improving our governance and culture, improving our life cycle and long-term planning through our systems that we have in place, our strategic asset management modeling software that we have in place across all our major asset classes now, and really focusing on what information we hold about our assets and improving that over time. Now, what you'll notice down the bottom here is, current sort of state. We have, through our strategic modeling, we have a really good idea now of what our renewal gap is currently, what our renewal ratio is, what our backlog is, so the proportion of our assets that are in poor and failing condition. And also we've done some really rigorous soul searching around the state of our asset management maturity. And we've used our National Asset Management Assessment Framework to come up with that figure. What we've then done is we've looked at the road ahead and where we want to be. We've looked at what we're currently spending on our renewal, which is $28.2 million. And our strategic modeling's told us that an optimal position would be to increase this to 45.7 million renewal budget. And what that will enable us to achieve over the 10 years is to reduce our renewal gap from 26 million to 8.6 million, to improve the state of our renewal ratio to a much healthier 84%, to reduce our backlog. And we have in place a number of tools and systems to increase our asset management maturity. So this is our story. And we've been able to take this to our councillors and to our executive. And we have actually managed to achieve approval of this funding through this story. So it's been a really, it's been successful, I should say. And we've gone from a very low base in our asset practice to actually being, I don't know, confident. Ashay might be, oh yeah, let's go with that, confident. We're pretty confident in the way we're sitting now. So what our key focus in terms of our challenges are at the moment or going forward, as Jorge was mentioning earlier, through what ISO 55000 is really telling us is that culture is so fundamental in the way we run our asset management. And I think, Ashay, you mentioned in the previous session that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it does. We can have this wonderful story, we can have all these systems and practices, but if the organization is not on board, then yeah, we're not going to get very far. Our culture, this diagram here on the left is really, what we've really identified is we can't just have one person who drives assets. That's been another sort of learning opportunity in Australia, is that if you have one person or two people who are driving asset management and those people leave, all the good work can sort of come to a bit of a standstill. So we need to drive this throughout the organisation, build asset management into position descriptions across the organisations and all of these key roles that exist across the organisation. We need to be creative, and Ben's pointed out a number of awesome tools and templates and starting points, but we can be creative with how we use those and apply them to our unique organisations. Capacity building, again, we need to make sure that our organisations, once we free up capital, do we have the capacity to spend that capital? So potentially changing up the way our organisations are structured around this new practice, and collaboration. So the seminar that we're running today, fundamental, reaching out, interlinking with others who are trying to run this journey is absolutely fundamental. So Ashay, that's really probably went over my 5 minutes, but that's a bit of, in a nutshell, what we're doing in Geelong.
No, fantastic, Michelle. Thank you. You didn't quite go over the 5 minutes, but the great content within that time. And really sets the scene for this immensely diverse and collaborative group to start to think about the different aspects of asset management, right from organizational leadership through to what type of data and information may be needed, so we can make better decisions about the future. Mike, I assume Sergio will come at the end of the interactive session or make comments at this point. I wasn't exactly sure about that.
I would like you to start the discussion based on what you've heard and make some of the connections that you see are important. And then, yes, Sergio will come naturally.
So let me make a point in case here, if you don't mind, hearing all of those great presentations. One thing that really stands out from Brazil to Colombia to Ontario to Michigan and then down under in Australia is it must be a journey. This is not an overnight mission, and it's certainly not a. There's no shortcuts to achieving excellence in this space, because just like a human life, these assets also have a long life, and they degrade at a certain level over time. But what is also coming out as a great theme is when you think about any municipality, whether it's the United States, Mexico, Brazil, the United Kingdom, or Australia, an average municipality has got a replacement cost of about 2 billion US dollars to make it consistent. 2 billion US dollars for the pipes, the road pavements, the buildings, the underground drainage, the sidewalks. $2 billion of replacement cost simply means if this infrastructure got wiped out tonight, it would cost us $2 billion as an average municipality to put it back in. And we saw the city of Geelong was about 3.1. The city of San Francisco might be 27 billion. But 2 billion on an average is getting eaten up or consumed at a staggering rate of about 30 million per year. And if our capacity as an organization is not at the 30 million level on an average to pay for the replacement and the replenishment and the upgrade of that infrastructure over time, let's say it's 27 million, then immediately we've got a $3 million gap. And that's what ASCII is talking about in terms of the backlog reports. And our job as practitioners is to bring it together to say, how do I plug that gap without necessarily spending more money? How do I plug that gap without printing more money? And more importantly, in an environment where we've been given some IIJA funding now, formula-based, how do we ensure we get the house in order? So it's not just a 2 or 3 year funding splash, but really a 10, 20 year getting the house in order metric. And that's the sort of focus I'd like to throw open to the panel in terms of facilitating the discussion. And if I might start with you, Chris, if that's okay, and ask about your recent experience in Canada, embarking on a regulation driven by good practice. How did the municipalities take up, and what was your experience in terms of pushback or acceptance from a leadership perspective?
I think that there's always there was a lot of resistance at first to regulation. Obviously, for any recipient, lower level of government, in this case municipalities, to receive funding, the best case scenario is to receive funds with the least strings attached, because that maximizes your spending flexibility. But the province tried that, and it found very mixed results. And so there was a lot of back and forth. And this is, as you say, Ashay, it's a journey. This is in Ontario, just let alone the US. I mean, this is just one province. The journey's taken over 10 years. And by no means would I say we're mature at this. It started out as the municipalities it took a while to for the municipalities to develop the uptake. And I think one of the important points that may not necessarily be apparent is that different levels of government, just as you have line of sight within an organization, across levels of government, it's important to have line of sight in terms of appreciation of the value of asset management. And I think as that has evolved, it's become easier to do things.
Yeah. And that kind of leads also into encouragement and participation from all levels of government. I'd just like to ask that question to Ben, because Ben's experience with the IPWEA in Australia in particular in relation to capacity build. What were your experiences, Ben, in terms of bringing capacity up particular notches as that maturity starts to increase? How important was that?
It's extremely important, because without the capability and capacity increasing, then you're kind of trying to push it uphill. You can have all the intent in the world to want to do the best and have, all the plans in place to do that. But if you don't have the staff, and Michelle touched on it, it's having the capability within the organization. So it's not reliant on one person, it's building organizational capability, because if someone leaves, you don't want all of the knowledge, the understanding, and the ability to go with them. You need to have that organization as a whole being able to deliver that, which is why that, there's development of practice notes and things like that to really support the organization being able to start somewhere and then develop their own and make that work for their particular requirements.
Yeah. And on that note, if Jorge, I might come to you in relation to your implementation of ISO 55000, and what is the leadership thinking in terms of that capacity build, and also what is the leadership thinking in implementing ISO 55000 around some of the aspects of data and information as you see it from your agency perspective. Jorge?
Asher,
Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah, so the question was more, Jorge, around we are hearing the fact that this is a journey. We are hearing that it requires capacity build. We've heard Michelle's position around people, processes, and being creative about how asset management gets implemented. Just wanted to get a perspective of from an ISO 55000 perspective, what are you seeing as the aspects of how your organization is going through it, and how leadership is getting involved in the implementation?
Yes, in Colombia, it's not implementation as a whole. It's only in the energy, in distribution energy. No, as Australia, UK, where is the municipalities or all the country. Only here is in a sector of energy, and it's more than the company has to do the job, has to improve, means the standards, because the government is not really involved in that. Each company has a route to implement, because we have a requirement from the regulator only for distribution, and the capabilities we have or we are developing in times began with the competence, and we follow the Institute Asset Management Competence Framework. And this is for people. For assets, we have a taxonomy, we have a critically, and we have index of asset health to mark or to
Got it.
to put a yes. Yeah, but it's not the same in all the country. Each company has your route to get the certification, and only the regulator give money to the companies for asset, like EAM, business intelligence, or APM, but no for skills, not for improve the skills of the people that work in asset management.
Yeah, and it is something that's a great point to make, because what you're saying is at the end of the day, the concepts are similar, but you're driven by the need from a regulator to have a serviceable, safe, reliable, repeatable infrastructure that delivers 24/7 at certain performance standards, which is no different in a sense, I guess, to governments, which has a duty of care to its citizens to provide that reliability in the services, but more importantly, also ensuring that the future taxpayer doesn't necessarily end up footing the bill for what could have been potentially avoided in government infrastructure. And that's something I'd love to bring you on, Michelle, here to talk about service levels from that perspective, and how you went about the journey getting the finance team and the engineering team and the board members and the community engaged on making this process consistent. And then I'll come back to you, Chris, if you don't mind, in terms of the same experience in Canada, because I'd like to draw the parallels.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, Ashay, it's a big journey. I think certainly having really clear asset management plans in place. And I think, Chris, you were talking about having consistent asset management plans and some clear guidelines around the plans that we all produce. So I think our communities are becoming, well, the act that was introduced last year, the Local Government Act, was very clear that we had to actually go out to deliberative community engagement, which was a big shock. It still is a big shock for many of us in local government in Australia to actually go out to the community and not just inform them about what we're doing, but actually get their feedback and help them to understand what levels of service mean from an asset management context. So we're talking about, you know, if we have a park or we have a road, this is what a condition 5 is, this is what a condition 1 is, what's acceptable to you in which area. So going through really a process of education with the community, respectfully, to help them to understand what our modelling process is, how we set up those levels of service, and how those levels of service actually link to funding and affordability and sustainability of that funding. It's been a really, really interesting exercise. We were very nervous going out to the community to do this because we weren't sure how they would engage with it, but it was actually incredibly interesting. And we all thought that they'd be most interested in lots of more funding for sports and recreation facilities. But a lot of the community came back and they were very interested in our drainage assets and those sorts of assets, because they're really, really aware in Australia about climate change. And they understand the link between increased flooding and those sorts of things and having a good drainage network. So I think it was really interesting to learn that the community are probably a lot more informed than what we thought. And also their openness to increase spending. You know, if they can see the benefit, if they can really see where the money's going, that they actually are open to not just, you know, cutting down costs, but even I think in some parts of Australia, I think, Ashay, there've been some councils where rate rises have been agreed to when they can see where, you know, what the benefit of the spend is, that the community are open to that. So that's with the community, I suppose, having a really clear structure around our asset management plans and helping the community understand what that asset management plan is and what the process is has been key. In terms of the finance team and the different parts of the organization, I think Jorge is mentioning different cultures in different countries. We have different cultures in the one organization. So bringing the finance team together with the engineers has been, myself, I'm an engineer. I have 20 years in engineering, so I think like an engineer. I like to have a project plan in place. I like to have a year plan or a 2-year plan. My experience sometimes with the asset accountants and the finance team is it's probably a little bit more transactional, like what's on the desk today. So bringing those two approaches together has been interesting. I probably discovered my first grey hairs up in Queensland, working when I was placed in a finance team, trying to work through the implications of fair value accounting standards. So it's been challenging, but I think ultimately what's probably brought everything together really clearly is the changes to the Local Government Act, having that mandated and regulated, that we all understand we have to be in the same room, we have to have a clear process, and we have to come together. And our budgets have to be formed, and a long-term financial plan has to be informed by the asset planning process, and that is mandated now, has really brought everything together, Ashay. And that's probably
these are really solid points. And before we just move on, Michelle, what I'm hearing is, in terms of informing the community, you must have scenarios on how much funding is required for a desired service level. So for example, if you want the grass cut 4 times a week compared to once a week, how can we trade that off against giving you roads with less potholes or facilities where the roofs don't leak, or we give you 24/7 access to all the public toilets? Is that the sort of thing you're talking about from a journey perspective?
Absolutely, showing them the trade-offs. And we've been we're in the really solid position at the moment with Geelong that we have all our models across all our asset classes. So we can literally show them if we spend $5 million more there, we're going to have to take it from there. And the implication on this asset class over the 10 years, we can actually show them visually in a map to show them what the state of the assets is going to be in 10 years. In our drainage assets, if we take $10 million away from roads and put it into drainage, that's going to be the impact on the state of the roads. And they can visually see in a really simple way what those impacts are. That brings it home for them. They don't have to be an engineer. They don't have to be an accountant. They can see it, and it just tells the story, as was mentioned earlier. And the community are open to that. I think where they become, where they like anyone, where they have trouble is where they really can't understand what the outcome of that spending is going to be. But when they can see it, they can get on board and they can come on the journey with us.
That's a great segue into the Canadian landscape, Chris. If I could just bring you in to share your thoughts, because you've had the luxury, Chris, of working across hundreds of municipalities and helping them on this journey from a Canadian perspective. So really like to understand your views on that.
Just as a reflection, I mean, these conversations are fascinating because I think in Ontario, we look to places, jurisdictions like Australia or New Zealand in terms of, and the UK in terms of their progress on asset management and what might be ahead for us. And I would imagine that this mostly American audience is probably finding some clues about what could be in the cards for them if they embark on this asset management journey, as I hope they will. And I want to just thread in a response to a question from Jim Dieter about, have you found challenges reconciling the asset management plans and the strategic asset management policies and people's understanding of the role of each? And I'm going to want to tie this back into responses from Michelle and Ben and yourself, Ashay. And the answer is absolutely. I think that as we've rolled out asset management in Ontario, I'm not proud to say this, but it is what it is. It's often a checkbox. I mean, you have 444 municipalities and ranging from a few hundred people to all the way up to the city of Toronto, which is one of the largest cities in North America. So there's a very broad range of municipalities, but I would say in general terms that the first 5 to 10 years have been sort of primarily characterized by templates, checkbox kinds of exercises. And they almost think about, like when Ashay, you talk about levels of service, or Michelle talks about engaging residents, we're not there yet. I mean, and I think for us where Ontario is at, if I'm speaking in general terms, I think we're struggling to really link in levels of service with the whole risk management piece and with the whole budget piece. And to Jim's questions about reconciling asset management plans and strategic asset management policies, I think what Michelle and Ben talked about in terms of building up a strong culture, the organizational understanding, the how do you make asset management normal practice? That's the real challenge. And what I find interesting is in more mature jurisdictions like Australia, they have organizations like IPWA, and Ben talks about they're having practice notes for different kinds of things. And I think that's the sort of thing that develops as a jurisdiction becomes a bit more mature in terms of its asset management practice. And I would imagine as part of that, you develop stronger communities of practice where municipalities and organizations share with each other what they're doing in asset management and their journeys through forums like ALN. So kind of in summary, we're still at a little bit of the checkbox model, and we're not quite at the phase where we're truly integrating all the different pieces of asset management. And that's where, but the funny thing about asset management is that it takes quite a bit of work going through different kinds of processes, identifying data gaps to condition assessments to levels of service and so forth. And you start, as you kind of go through that journey, you really, the realization of value kind of really escalates a lot after you've reached a certain inflection point. And so that's kind of where we're at in general. So
yeah. Now they're great points. Like it's called the maturity journey, and Jorge also touched on that quite a bit in his presentation, and also Edisio did as well, which I'll come to Edisio in a minute. But I think, Chris, the greatest takeaway from what you just said is acknowledgement of the fact that it is a maturity curve, and there is no quick fix, because it's long life infrastructure, and you're bringing a whole army of people on the journey from the boardroom to the back room, if you want to put it that way. But what it also demonstrates is it's got to be given time, and the maturity shifts from generation 1 to what we call here generation 5, where generation 1 might just be all we know about our infrastructure is we have $2 billion worth of assets. In generation 3, you might be able to say, of that, I've got about 50 million in backlog. And generation 3.5 might say, of that 50 million, I know that the critical assets are only about 3 million. Generation 4 and 5 is really about information that says my data and science is now mature, where I'm able to look at future scenarios. For example, how do I reduce that backlog by spending money differently? And Jorge, I'll come to you in a minute, but from your perspective, how does regulation impact on my ability to derive funding? And how do I then inform the regulator, not the community, in terms of my reliability to the service that I'm meant to deliver? So I'd just like to bring Sergio, Jorge, you into the conversation to say, from an asset management maturity perspective under ISO 55000, what is the leadership's commitment to grow that over a period of time, and how do you measure it? Do you measure it every year? Do you measure it more often or less often, or what's the plan?
Hi, Ashi. I believe that this committee is very important to development the ISO 55000. In my region, South America, I believe that this standard is very new for us.
Can you turn on your camera?
It is on.
Oh, I'm not seeing it. I'm sorry.
Yes, this standard in my region is very new, and my perception is that the big companies, mainly the companies from electricity supplier, is looking for this standard. My expectation, the expectation of ABS QE, at least in the Americas, is to increase this certification, this standard. And this type of conference call, this type of meeting is very important to show the work made by the presenters, the companies, and to show our certification body like an entity that that can provide certifications using this new standard. Okay. In Brazil, for example, we have a committee that is dedicated for this standard, made by ABNT, Associação Brasileira de Normas Técnicas, a Brazilian association. And the idea is to increase the standard for the next years, okay?
Yeah, great. Edisio, can I bring you in for a little while just to talk about, you also briefly mentioned the ISO 55000 maturity and the fact that you were able to bring the organization on the 9000 journey as well. What were some of the difficulties or the challenges you may have faced in attempting that, and particularly the maturity analysis and the acknowledgement of where you are, and how did you move down your journey?
Okay, thank you, Ashay. My big difficulty, not difficult, but a concern in the beginning of the project was convince the leadership team to implement ISO 55000. Okay, in our site. During this period of time, we need to demonstrate so many benefits that ISO 55000 can bring for Syngenta. And after that, we had, as I said, we did some benchmark with another companies in order to show for the leadership team the benefits and the ISO 55000 can add value for the business, okay? This is one of the biggest difficulty in the beginning. After that, after the leaders are convinced that the benefits for us, I had a good support from them in order to develop our project and influence all stakeholders, because can you imagine, I implemented in 4 sites at the same time, 29 areas involved in this project, okay? 29 stakeholders, 29 managers, can you imagine how many people are involved on that? So many people. And one other difficult for us, because when we start to implement, we had it in my mind to have a face-to-face meeting, no? But when we start to implement, the pandemic situation was changed a lot around the world. So we implemented our system by Zoom. Can you imagine? It's so difficult by Zoom because we have so many people, so many sites, locations. It was difficult for us. This is the best difficult for us. But now we have 2 months certified, and you can see many benefits in 2 months, okay? 2 months after the implementation, we are achieving our targets that we are planned for the end of this year. For example, one of our targets is increasing 3% of availability of our equipment. Oh, only 3%? Yes, only 3%, because the average in the past is 90.5% of the availability. Is to increase 3% is so difficult, okay? So now the plants, the average in availability of our plants is 98.5%. Can you imagine increase 3.5% now in availability in three months? It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable because our business is increasing a lot. The production volume is so important for us to have more product capacity to deliver our products, because we do not have so many investments for this year, but next year we have. But we need to deliver more than products than last year. Last year we delivered 2 million bags, but this year we need to deliver 2.5 thousand million bags. So it's a big volume for us. It's almost 25% more than the last year. So, but the big difficult for us was in the beginning and the pandemic situation for us. Okay.
Yeah. So it's again like a journey where you've been able to take the organization through the merits and win the patriotism, if you like, in terms of the challenge of asset management.
Yeah.
Which is great to hear. I might throw a quick question to Michelle before I go to Ben Clark. Sorry, Michelle. On this notion of if I look back 20 years when I started my career in asset management, you are spot on. Asset management was 1 or 2 people sitting in a corner office, typically engineers, and staring at and spreadsheets of data. To now, asset management, at least from what I've seen in Australia and parts of Canada, is really touching and getting the human factor into the thinking across the board. Can you share some examples of in terms of Geelong where you see that interaction happening, and it's not just 1 or 2 people doing their spreadsheets?
Yeah, so now that we have our models set up and which produce our capital works plan across each of our major asset classes, the practice we now have in the organization is our funding and our budgets are driven by what's coming out of our models, and our renewal budgets are coming out of those models. So I'll just quickly share I'll just quickly share. I shared in the last presentation that I did, but this is literally a seminar that we had, or not a seminar, a meeting that we had a week or so ago in preparing our budgets. So we have here what's coming out of our models, our renewal funding that's required across the different asset classes. And in this meeting, where we're literally thrashing out what our budget's going to be next year, we have our financial reporting manager, our chief financial officer, a communications officer, a fellow from our corporate strategy team, sports and rec, poor old Sean there from engineering, looking very concerned about losing all of his funding into other key, losing some funding from roads that are in very good condition to potentially going into buildings, which perhaps need a little more funding. So we have all of these people in the one room discussing what's coming out of our models and thrashing out a budget. And I personally, actually, I've never seen that before in 20 years doing this work. I've never seen actually people engaging around this on the one platform. And I think the question that came before around linking the individual asset management plans to our strategic asset management plan, this is literally where that's happening in practice.
This is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic to see cross pollination of ideas and really bringing asset management to life. So it's not one person's job. Really great, really great. Ben, I might throw it to you at this stage on that point there. With so many people involved in asset management, where do you think the world is in terms of capacity build, just generally in terms of, if you want to focus on Australia, that's fine. And where do you see the gaps might be in terms of bringing the maturity up?
Yeah, so if I start with Australia, I think a lot of organisations in terms of capability and capacity are, particularly in the metropolitan regions, are fairly well equipped now. And they're now looking to take that next level, as Michelle's touched on, really starting to not inform the community, but engage the community and have a two-way conversation. So that's where the next sort of capability needs to be built in Australia in terms of the metropolitan, in the regional and like sort of regional areas. They're still working towards that capability. It's hard to get experienced professionals to move to some of the regions out into the country and things like that. So they're probably a little bit further behind in their maturity. But as we mentioned before, when they're working together, and Chris touched on it, we have quite good communities of practice in Australia, which means that these regional councils can lean on the larger, more mature councils to get, some recommended processes, some resourcing, some support. Because it's obviously public sector, there's no competition. It's about sharing that knowledge, sharing that, and supporting that, because we're here for the communities. So that's what I'm seeing in Australia. And as I mentioned in my talk earlier, it's about that storytelling aspect. That's where the capability needs to be increased further in Australia, to sell the trade-offs and those things, those scenarios. I think throughout the rest of the world, if you look at Canada, for example, they're in similar. There's some that are more advanced than others, but it's really making sure that whatever capacity and capability is built, it's being embedded in the organisation and not just, all right, we've ticked the box and we're on to the next piece of capability. It's no, that capability needs to be embedded and become a day-to-day operation and a
way
part
of life.
of the asset management, way of life, exactly.
Yeah.
And, what we've found in Australia, we've managed to, asset management is like work health and safety now. It's a part of everyday business. It's treated in a similar kind of light as what work health and safety is. And I think that took a long time for it to be seen as that. It was until it was legislated, until people understood the benefits and what that was going to do moving forward. And obviously the risk of not managing our assets properly. Once that picture was told and painted, then they really understood the need to do it properly and then build that capability within their organizations.
Yeah. Chris, I might throw one at you. In terms of the content of an asset management plan, what are the 3 or 4 themes that really need to come out from your perspective to really inform either the community or even engage with stakeholders?
That's a great question. I think not just for the community, but for the organization itself, it's having a clear understanding about the levels of service that an organization is committed to providing, the
Yeah.
costs associated with various levels of service, and associated risks
Yeah.
that are correlated to different levels of service and funding levels.
Yeah.
And being able to communicate that in a simple way that the person on the street can understand, but that can be amplified and developed by the expert. And hitting that sweet spot, that's the challenge.
Yeah.
And so we're taking inspiration from organizations that are using dashboards that, for example, Michelle's got a one pager and things like that. And so those are the kinds of things that we're looking at.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. And I think that you've hit the nail on the head. It's the levels of service. What will it cost to keep it at the current level? And you mentioned risk, which is absolutely spot on, which is what is the impact if I either didn't fund or adopted a different strategy or tactic, which is exactly what ISO 55000 principles are based on. Whether you look at the ISO 55000 SAMP or the asset management plan in the template of the International Infrastructure Management Manual. But it's really shifting from that paper-based 150-page document that sits on a shelf to saying, how do I now convert this into a way of life mechanism where asset management is everyone's, not problem, but everyone's motivation to really get out of bed in terms of preserving this and delivering reliable services. I'm just conscious of time, Mike, but I might just quickly share my screen for the benefit of everyone, just to show something that is some great work that is done in Topeka in Kansas City in the US. And just like Chris was alluding to, and I think Michelle also touched on this in terms of keeping it simple for the community. You can see here in this case in Topeka, for example, this is their streets, where you can see on their spatial layer what the health of their streets is on a red, yellow, green scale, where red is really bad and green is really good. And just the ability to say, if I spend $24 million in a different way over a period of time, what does that mean in terms of the health? And being able to slide the bar in a council chamber or a community forum to say, spending money using this particular strategy is going to deliver in 15 years, the city of Topeka streets will end up looking like this map. This is the city you will live in. Is that an acceptable outcome? Or if we switch to an alternative scenario, and have a look at starting at the same point, but over 15 years, spending the money in that particular fashion, could perhaps end up with a higher risk and more assets in backlog compared to if I spent $24 million using the previous scenario. You've still spent $24 million, but it's been spent in two different ways. And one of those ways has both reduced the backlog as well as ended up with an infrastructure that is more reliable, more serviceable, safer, as well as created more dollars in the community's pockets to be spending on other programs. And that, in simple terms, the ability to demonstrate that is the real essence of what everyone on this panel is in the game of. So, Mike, I might just bring you back on in terms of the session and throw it open to the audience in terms of closing remarks or any salient points you might want to make from what we've heard and seen today.
Well, Ashay, that was perfect to bring it to Topeka, because that's what we're trying to do, is bring the expertise from around the world to the US and help the US develop the culture of asset management that is happening in these other countries already. And so thank you for ending it in Topeka, where I know you've been doing work and they're experiencing some benefits from your structured approach to asset management that you're bringing to them. And I want to acknowledge Astrid Ramirez from EPM. And thank you for joining us. And I'll be asking you and Adesio to give us a full presentation. You've really intrigued us with the small, piece that you've showed this time. But boy, we want to know more about the results of your 4 ISO 55000 certifications. And anytime you want to, you're welcome back in English and Spanish to present further. And then Rodolfo Vega Manrique, if you could turn on your camera from ABS Quality Evaluations, if you would make just a very short comment about what you're observing in the areas where you're working and what the US might be able to learn from that. But we just have a little bit of time for you.
Yes, thanks. Hello, everyone. I'm working with ABS QE at this specific region in Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. Here, the main driver is coming for ISO 55000 certification. Is coming from the corporate driver, from some big companies, most of them transnational or multinational, some of them in the power sector. We do not have that big driver coming from government or coming from some regulation or regulatory framework. But I understand very well the importance of having asset management systems in place so we can deliver and keep infrastructure coming from, could be public works or could be some type of concession to a private company. But it's important to keep our resources available so we can deliver our service, we can deliver our product. I'm not sure how this is going to evolve into the future, into the short term, but I'm confident that working with standards as this ISO 55001 is a good way to approach this challenge, because basically we are working with this structure or framework of having this way to coordinate our resources, our control methods across all of our organizations so we can deliver a specific product or specific service according to specific requirements. So it's a way to put some order in our companies. It's a way to approach a specific challenge in considering what are the stakeholders and all the factors associated to it, as it has been achieved through other type of standards regarding quality, regarding environment, regarding safety. So I guess it will be a matter of time so we can begin hearing about more companies being interested in this specific standard. And I hope it could be in the public works sector, some type of new driver that will help to begin asking about this type of third-party certification schemes.
Excellent. So thank you. That reinforces the comments that people were saying about the importance of legislation, but really it's the culture that needs to be established, and a combination of the regulations and the culture. So the Asset Leadership Network is doing our part. Thank you for all of you who commented on the importance of these discussions. We appreciate that. And we missed the opportunity to get requirements into the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act itself. But this presentation will be formatted and created highlights, and we'll distribute it to legislators and agencies to try to help them write into their regulations and rules for the distribution of the funds so that there's more of these structured asset management principles required in the distribution. So thank you, everyone. Your expertise and insights is very helpful, especially thanks to our colleagues in Australia who woke up in the middle of the night in order to with us. And Ashay, your facilitation was expert. Really appreciate you coming on board to help with this. Look forward to continuing the conversations with all of you, and just very grateful for your participation. Now I'll ask Nick to come on, and we will thank our organizational members and talk about what's coming up next. So really appreciate that ABS was able to participate in this. And again, Ashay Prabhu's Aesthetic is a member. Really appreciate their support, and want to highlight that tomorrow we're going to be continuing this discussion by having Michael Demers from Grant Thornton, who was with the Missouri Department of Transportation, join us on ALN Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern. He'll be commenting and trying to wrap up a lot of what's happened here.